starting off just putting some blobs of paint onto this acrylic paper. For those of you that want to know more about my materials, I'll put a link in the description below about the materials I use and the basic techniques. What I'm doing now is I'm using a large flat brush and I'm just covering the entire sheet of paper with this pink paint, and it's kind of like an underpainting, and it sort of sets the tone for everything. It's a really good way of loosening up as well and takes the fear out of this white paper, or if you're using a canvas or anything like that, I'd recommend it. So I blow dried this pink background so it's dry, and I'm just sketching in now. If you look at the reference photograph, I'm just sketching in the really basic outline of this landscape stroke seascape. I'm using Naples yellow, and I'm just sort of using a small brush, painting this wet on dry, just really basic shapes. Don't go into it in too much detail. The detail can come later. What I do when I'm painting, whether I'm painting in acrylics or watercolor, is I work large to small. So I'm just painting the biggest shapes first. So I've squeezed out some white, black and Prussian blue, and I'm mixing a little bit of the white, the black and the Prussian blue sort of in various quantities, and I'm going to paint this onto the sea area. With acrylic painting, you work dark to light, so I'm putting on the darkest value tones first of all, and that's with the black with the Prussian blue, and then gradually I'll add a tiny bit of white to that just to lighten the colour up. But I will actually put some lighter marks on later, wet on dry. So I'm sort of blending this in. Acrylics dry quite quickly. You can buy a retarder for them, or you can add a tiny little bit of water, and that dilution of the water will kind of keep the paint wetter for longer. And what I do is, well, I make my own homemade stay wet palette, because they do dry so quickly even when you've squeezed them out. So I've got a sort of plastic box. I put some paper towel and wet it, and then put some greaseproof or parchment paper on top. And it's a process called osmosis. That sort of damp paper towel keeps your acrylics from drying out. So it's really, really great. So I would recommend that. And it's a really, cheap way of doing it instead of going out and buying a stay wet palette. So as you can see there, I'm adding a little bit of white. I'm still blending, and the paint is now dry. And what I'm doing now is I'm mixing up some burnt umber, you could use burnt sienna, and some black. And I'm just painting this brown sort of over this pink background. Now I'm not using the most expensive acrylics. The artist acrylics will be quite opaque and you won't see that pink coming through, but I was just gonna just use my student acrylics and just sort of paint on this sort of brown burnt umber color, wet on dry, with my 1-inch flat brush. What I would recommend at this stage, because these are really basic shapes, is try to be quite expressive with your brush marks. Really kind of loosen up, almost paint from the shoulder to the elbow. Really enjoy it. See up there, I'm really sort of getting my wrist to move around. I'm just really having fun with it. What I've done there is I've added a little bit, tiny touch of Naples yellow to the black, just to kind of create a lighter, slightly lighter colour. Still quite dark, but sort of a slightly lighter tone, because the light of my light that I've got above is shining on the acrylics. It's looking a bit lighter than what it actually is. So you're just sort of putting a sort of a lighter tone on there with the black, with the brown, with a touch of white even, or the Naples yellow. If you don't have Naples yellow, you could use something like yellow ochre or raw sienna. But yeah, I'm just blocking in these rocks. So I've just squeezed out some sap green. You can use any sort of mid-tone green. And I've got still a bit of lighter colour on my brush, and I'm just blocking in this mid-tone in all the sort of grass area on this cliff top here. Don't worry about the clover, don't worry about that. Acrylics are an opaque medium. We're going to paint that on top afterwards. We'll take care of that detail later. So you can see already I'm just blocking in the sea, the rocks and the grasses. So you've kind of got three sort of different colours, and already that pink paint is starting to disappear. Even if you've got little bits of background pink coming through, don't worry, it creates a little bit of colour harmony. And also because the clover is a pinky sort of shade, it looks kind of nice. So I put a lighter green in there. It's like a limey green, but you could just add some yellow to your sap green or your mid green. I'm using sort of like a size 6, or just quite a small round brush, and I'm just putting these grasses in. My background is dry. As you saw there, the top left hand side, I've left a bit of pink there because I'm going to put some clover there. So I thought I'd leave a little bit of pink showing. So I'm squeezing a little bit more now of a sort of a limey yellow colour, but a little bit of cadmium yellow or lemon yellow will be absolutely fine. And I'm just painting these lighter grasses now. Sort of the paint underneath is still wet, so I can blend it through. I'm now using a bit of raw sienna, and I'm sort of painting some of the clover, keeping it very loose. You've got this sort of yellow sort of bits on the clover as well, so I'm just painting that now. Little dogs, little marks, it's all sort of different brush marks. Try to vary it, and that's what I'm doing here. And I'm just sort of putting little blobs here and there, little dots, little marks. You can let your painting dry, use a blow dry or something like that. I'm using some magenta. You could use permanent rose or crimson, any sort of cold red pink colour. And I'm just sort of, you know, putting some quite free little circles onto the painting, really quite sort of roughly putting them in. If you look at the photograph, just sort of put them in, just sort of, I mean, it's quite nice on the right hand side, they're quite spaced out, whereas on the left hand side they're a little bit more closer together. But you know, apart from that, just have fun with it, just little circles here and there, just keep it really loose. This is why it's so suitable for beginners, because I'm showing you how you can build up dark to light, large to small, you know, waiting for your layers to dry and just kind of building, you know, now we're going into these smaller shapes, and just have fun with it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to start adding a little bit of lighter colour there. You can use a lighter pink, or you could add a little bit of white to your pink, but you don't want to go too light too soon. So I'm sort of putting a light to mid-tone pink on there, because I'm going to wait for the lightest lights at the end. So save those whites till later. I always say to my students, try not to use any white if you can, because what happens sometimes, we go in too light too soon and our paintings can look flat. So trust me, just go for those light to mid-tones and paint those in. I'm using a flat brush. You could use a round brush. You could even use your fingertip to paint this. So whatever you feel comfortable, have fun with it. Just keep it rough, keep it loose. Don't worry about that detail at this stage. It will come later. there I was putting some definite marks in there, just using the tip of my brush just to show a few petals, just a little bit. So now I've got some white mixed up, hardly any white on my brush. It's almost like a dry brush. I don't want to put it on too thick. I want to sort of scrub it on. I'm just using white. If you're worried about just using the white, you can put a tiny touch of blue, but it's just for a bit of surf on the water, a little bit of white there, and just putting it in between here as well as it coming out. It's mostly around the rocks, the edges of the rocks there, just to bring that to life. You don't want to put too much white and light on the background where I'm painting here, because it'll come forward too much and flatten the picture. I want to create the illusion of space, and so I want to give it less attention there and give the flowers and the foreground rocks and grasses a lot more attention, so it comes forward and it creates that sort of 3D look on a 2D surface. But I'm putting a little bit more white up the top there, getting it more on the tip of my brush. I did wait for my background to dry, so everything's wet on dry here, and I'm just sort of putting it in there. And don't, you know, as I'm doing here, just blend with your fingers as well. Don't be afraid to do that. You know, get in there and just have some fun with it. And I'm taking my time. I'm thinking about things. So always be very conscious and present in the moment with your painting. Don't just paint for the sake of it. Just, you know, really think about what you're doing. So I'm putting in a little bit of a salmony pink colour here, a warm pink. So I've added a little bit of yellow to my pink and white colour. So I want to put a little bit of warmth there as I'm painting away here, just to create a little bit of variety of colour as well, and it looks quite nice. So the clover are the stars of the show, and I'm giving my stars lots of attention and lots of detail. So I've added a little bit of white to that, and I'm just working on the lights above the clover. It's more a little bit darker sort of underneath the petals, so lots of light on top because the sunshine is hitting that on the light in the sky. So you want to sort of create that effect. This is really kind of relaxing. You can really take your time with this. And the good thing about acrylics is, if someone rings on the doorbell or something like that, you can just stop and you can just, carry on where you left off when you come back to it. So just, have fun with it, so it's a little bit of art therapy as well. But already now, I feel like my painting is coming to life. And at this stage of the painting is when I get really excited. I think, oh yes, I can see it's working now. So what I would suggest as well don't give every flower the same amount of attention. So you might want to pick out sort of maybe 3 or 4 on the right hand side and the same on the left that have got a little bit more attention. If they're all the same, they tend to look a little bit flat as well. So, you want to bring some forward a little bit by giving a little bit more light and a little bit more details. And all these little tips hopefully will help you in other paintings that you might do in acrylics. So inspire you to paint from your own photographs or from life itself. So I'm just scrubbing a little bit of white. My brush has hardly got any white paint on it, and I'm just using the tooth of the paper or the surface of the paint there just to scrub this white paint on, just to kind of look like little highlights and the surf on top of the water there, on top of the sea. I'm using my brush now and just putting a little bit more light now on the top of this clover here and sort of showing some individual petals here and there. And remember, enjoy painting them, have fun. I've really enjoyed painting these pretty little clover flowers here. I've just squeezed out some really sort of light lemon yellow colour, and I'm just painting now with a liner brush, or you could use a rigger brush, just or a small brush, small round brush, and just putting in some lighter stems and leaves here and there. Remember, in acrylics we work dark to light, so I'm just putting on these lighter colours, and I've just made up a limey green as well, so I've just sort of put some light to mid tones on there. I'm just creating a little bit of variety. Sometimes it's quite tricky to paint thin lines in acrylics, and what I advise my students to do is just put a little tiny bit of water in your acrylic paint, just to kind of let it glide off your brush a little. It's a little bit easier, so I hope that's it's helpful advice. I'm just putting a little bit of limey light greens in between the clover flower there, just flicking a few leaves here and there, having fun with it really. Getting towards the end of the painting now. I've decided actually I'm going to put a little bit more white into the sort of where the surf is going up against the rock, just to give it a little bit more sparkle here and there, painting this wet on dry. I've mixed up a little bit of yellow ochre here as well, and I want to put a little bit of light on the top of the rocks where I can see it in the photograph. It's a bit lighter, and I'm blending with my finger there just to push it back a little bit, and just so it's got a little tiny bit of light and details there. I think it works quite well, and it's quite a nice balance. And I'm just getting my brush now just to soften that back a bit, to really blend it into the dark so it's not too contrasting. It's quite a nice little technique there. And what I'm doing to finish off, which I absolutely love doing, I love doing it in watercolour, I've watered down my acrylic slightly, the pink, and I'm just spattering some sort of the pink shade over the clover to give texture, lights and details, just to finish off. It's a technique I like to do because it stops me from fiddling and overworking my paintings as well. I thought I'd show you this really nice technique. Sometimes you get these little wooden pegs on the back of canvas paintings, and they're called keys, and they help stretch the canvas. However, if you don't have those, you could actually use some plastic cards cut up, whatever you can get, but I'm just printing with it to create sort of thin small stems. It's really useful, especially if you're struggling to paint these light thin sort of stems with a brush, and it just gives a little bit more texture, adds a little bit more detail and light. And I like this. I like to do this just to finish off. And here it is finished. I've removed the framing tape to reveal a lovely white border. It gives me sometimes a time to assess to see if I need to do any work, but I think I'll leave it there for now. I'm really pleased with it. I really hope you enjoyed that tutorial. I try to keep it simple but also creative. I always think about acrylic painting or any sort of painting like when you're looking through one of those camera lenses that you can adjust the focus, so you can start out being quite out of focus. You can be quite an abstract painter, or you can sort of bring it a little bit into focus and be more of an impressionistic painter, or you could really bring it into focus and be quite a realistic painter. This style of painting that I've shown you today gets you on the road to this, and I hope builds your confidence. And here is the finished painting here, and I'm really pleased that I've got this nice white border edge as well, and it just helps me to make decisions whether I need to make any changes, but I left it. It looks quite detailed, but I've tried to keep the technique simple so you know where you're going. You know you're building dark to light, large to small, and then ending up with detail and maybe a little spatter. Please drop me a line in the comments section below if you have any questions about this tutorial. And if you like this tutorial, why not subscribe to my YouTube acrylic channel, and you will get updates of my latest videos. Thank you again for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.